Right, everybody, so a very warm welcome to our lunchtime learning session today. My name is Nick Gibbons and I work for York Mind, and I am one of the partner organisations that are involved with this wonderful project you may have heard of called Thriving at Work. I'm joined by my wingman, Emma, who gives a wave, Emma, for those of you that, yeah, brilliant. So Emma works for Better Connect. She is the project manager there for the Thriving at Work programme, and she is the glue that holds it all together. And Emma's going to be giving us a little bit of an introduction just about what Thriving at Work is all about and why, hopefully, it can be a massive opportunity for you and your organisations. So the purpose of the webinar today, this lunchtime learning event, is it's a 45-minute session. So I will endeavour to get us finished by 1:15. And it really is just an opportunity to explore the subject of why employee mental health matters. So it's not a course, it's just an opportunity to give you some food for thought, but to spark discussions back in your own organisations. So there's going to be a little bit of input through some slides. And what I would ask is that if you've got any questions, if you maybe just pop those in the chat. Emma will keep an eye on the chat. She's my tech wingman as well. And then we can open up any questions at the end as well. We've just agreed that we are going to record it, but the bit that will be accessible is just going to be my presentation bit. So none of your information will be available, and we won't have the questions and stuff at the end either. So we will edit that accordingly. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, shall we crack on then? Brilliant. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen with you guys. Can everybody see that okay? Brilliant. Okay. So this is the first of our webinar series, and York Mind is one of the partner organisations within this, but there are a number of organisations that are helping support Thriving at Work. As I say, my name is Nick, and I'm a coach and also the coordinator for Thriving at Work here at York Mind. So I'm helping coordinate all the little bits we're involved with, which includes things like learning lunches and some training, but I'm also a coach, so I do a lot of kind of one-to-one support work as well. Emma, as I've said, she's from Better Connect, and she's going to introduce herself just in a sec and just explain a little bit about how Better Connect, the partner organisation, brings us all together. Okay, so we've got this 45 minutes, and what I want to cover today is, there's three areas really, just an overview of what Thriving at Work is. Secondly, it's about looking at what the changing landscape of mental health in your workplace, what is happening, and why it is so important for us to really recognise what is going on with employees' mental health. And also just to really kind of explore what is mental health. So I've got just a few slides that again will just give us a little bit of food for thought and to think about your own mental health, you know, people that you work with, the staff in your organisation. So again, just some input to help you start to think about things in that wider context. Okay, so Emma, would you like to just give us a little bit of a quick overview about what Thriving at Work is and why we're here today, just talking about mental health within that?
Sure. So for the people that sort of don't know me and don't know Better Connect, we're a project management company that sort of builds different projects around topics that sort of really are quite close to our hearts. So we do a lot of employability projects, and sort of Thriving at Work is our newest project, with a vision of inclusive, accessible and healthy workplaces that increase productivity and create an environment where all employees can thrive. And sort of within that project, we've developed kind of a three-pronged approach to improving inclusive practices within the workplace. We are aware that everybody sort of in our workplaces have a role to play. So we start at the top with the organisation itself. So with this element in mind, we have an inclusive workplace package where we can work directly with organisations to help them improve sort of the inclusive workplace practices within their organisations. And that sort of includes looking at policies and governance, recruitment and induction, the culture and values of an organisation, staff skills and training, reasonable adjustments and support, and also looking at quality standards and pledges. So what we found is everybody wants to work, wants to provide a place to work that is inclusive, that is a place where people really enjoy working and really come to thrive. We all have great ideas, but sometimes it can be quite difficult to put them into practice. So the idea around this element of the project is to help employers sort of achieve those desires, really. We then move down into the diversity training element of the project, and this is available for anybody in any organisation that would like to improve their knowledge about how to support peers, colleagues, members of staff within their sort of workplace that are neurodiverse, that have a work-limiting health condition or have a disability, or are experiencing mental health challenges. It's a really good opportunity delivered by many different partners on the project to help upskill and sort of learn new ways to help support our colleagues, friends, peers. And lastly, we offer workplace support. So it's a one-to-one support package for any employee within your organisation that may be neurodiverse, might have a disability or a work-limiting health condition, or are experiencing mental health challenges. And they're supported in a way that can help them to thrive in the workplace. That can be through coaching, it can be through mentoring, it can be through offering sort of skills training, it can be qualifications, anything that individuals sort of identify that would really help them thrive whilst they're working for you, essentially. So in a nutshell, that is thriving at work.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emma, for that. And we'll give you a little bit more information at the back end if you're wanting to get more information on how you can actually go about that. Okay, so mental health. I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes just thinking about the changing landscape at work and really the impact of COVID-19 that has had on absolutely all of us. When Thriving at Work, the project was initiated, and when it was first talked about, it was pre-COVID. COVID was a word that nobody knew at all. And at that time, there was a massive need to put some support around how people can thrive at work and make more inclusive, accessible workplaces for people with mental health, neurodivergency, disability. But COVID has kind of supercharged that situation. The landscape has completely shifted in the past couple of years. You know, that outbreak has cut across all areas of well-being, our physical, our mental, our social, and our financial. And it's impacted on all individuals. And it's been different for all of us, and most likely in multiple different ways and at different times, and continues to be so. So the impact of mental health is really kind of, it's affected us in all sorts of different ways, from health anxiety, uncertainty, isolation, limiting our access to things that keep us well, bereavement, trauma, the list goes on and on and on. But it's brought mental health into the arena like never before. And actually, the pandemic has provided a catalyst on which to actually start to have those conversations in organisations in a way that we perhaps couldn't envisage a couple of years ago. And I think it's indicative as well just how mental health has become a reality for a lot of people, in terms of really understanding how the pandemic has affected individuals, has made us kind of realise, you know, how extensive it is out there. There was in 2020, the Business in the Community study did a survey, and the percentage of employees that had experienced mental health symptoms caused at work or worsened by work during the COVID time in 2020 was 41%. That's an awfully big number. Okay, so that changing landscape is enormous. When I first came into work for York Mind, I was working on a Staying OK project, which was coaching people on a one-to-one, supporting them through this difficult time. And everybody's situations had changed, and it was a privilege to help support people through that period. But one of the things that was encouraging around that was the number of organisations out there that are supporting mental health. It's on the rise. You know, from 2019 to now, statistics again around that same study had moved from 55% up to 63%. So there's been a definite shift, I think, in how organisations are tackling that bigger kind of area of mental health. What I'd like you to do, just have a think about, and if you're happy to just put it in the chat, just to give us your guess, but how much do you think it costs employers every year, an annual cost, the full total of mental health costs in organisations? So all employers across the UK, give us a guess in terms of what you think that figure might be, and that will include things like sickness absence, staff turnover, presenteeism when people are there but perhaps are not performing at their best. I don't know, Emma, if you can see the chat to see if there's been any responses in there.
We've had billions from Jane, millions from Hayley.
Billions, millions.
1 billion from Joe.
Yeah. Okay, let me share some of those figures with you. Thank you for that. So the economic picture of it, it's enormous. The figures are quite shocking, and we are in the billion kind of territory. So employer costs alone. And this comes from a review that took place in 2017. So this all linked back to the review that Paul Farmer and Sir Dennis Stevenson did in 2017. So pre-COVID, employers' costs was in the region of 33 to 42 billion. Government costs, which includes things like, in terms of things like the NHS, but also tax costs, etc., was just 24 to 27 billion. And the UK economy as a whole was in the range of 74 to 99 billion. Now, COVID supercharged that. There is a report that hasn't yet been released, but all of those figures have gone northwards. And the impact it has on people, over 300,000 people with a long-term mental health condition lose their jobs every single year. So the actual economic cost of it is absolutely enormous. It is quite shocking. But also, more importantly than that, in some respects, is the human cost behind the numbers. So at any point in time, the statistics tell us that 1 in 5 workers nationally are experiencing some sort of mental health difficulty. You just take a moment just to think about your own settings, your own organisations, putting faces to those numbers. Think about that in terms of 1 in 5, you know, there's about 10 of us on the call, 2 in that number, you know, the numbers are large. And the causes of these problems can arise at work, but can be contributed to by external pressures in people's personal lives. And there's some of the statistics behind that, and I'm not going to go into lots of them, but kind of one of the biggest kind of areas around, one of the areas that is really significant is that suicide is the most serious crisis associated with mental health. And the biggest cause of death in men under 50 is suicide. And each year in the UK, more women than men attempt suicide. So those numbers, you know, they are big. But behind each statistic, wherever those statistics lie, lies a much larger area of mental distress, short of suicide or attempted suicide. Mental health is an issue for us all. So the human case and the economic case, it is something that just can't be ignored, you know, and getting this on the radar with organisations is absolutely at the heart of Thriving at Work and what we're about. So what is mental health? Okay, we start some quick facts around it, and it is, you know, we've got a short amount of time, but as Emma kind of said, we've got some training on this, both awareness, some more first aid kind of stuff, but also champion training is available around all of this. But mental health, we all have mental health, and it fluctuates. It's on a continuum. And I like this graphic because it kind of just shows you how that continuum and that dial can move across all of these different these different sections, from our mental health going through excelling, thriving, surviving, struggling, or in crisis. And our mental health, it affects how we think, feel, and act. It can impact on how we cope and interact and form relationships with people, and how well we function on a day-to-day basis. So we all have mental health like we have physical health. But there's also mental ill health. And mental ill health, I think people can often get lost in a lot of the definitions, but just to keep it simple, mental ill health is when the difference between poor mental health and mental illness is when things become more severe, when things last longer, and when there's a significant effect on a person's ability to cope. Okay. And there's lots of different types of mental ill health, lots of different disorders. And just to give you just some headlines around that, you'll be familiar potentially with some of the things like anxiety, mood disorders, from depression to mania, schizophrenia, personality disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders, eating disorders. Some are more common than others. Some are more short-term, some are long-term. And the causes can be multiple. So if we could just take a minute just in the chat again, if Emma can just have a quick look at that for me, but just kind of what can cause mental health illness? Just throw a few ideas out there and we'll just pull some of those out. Just jot down your ideas if you can.
Family issues from Joe.
Mm-hmm.
The workplace.
Yep.
Stress, changing relations, finances, financial hardship.
Yeah.
Relationships, substance misuse. Bullying. Housing issues. I missed one then, sorry, flicked up too quick. Physical illness.
Brilliant. And so the list goes on. Absolutely. Thank you for that. The causes are wide ranging, and often it's a complicated combination of factors as well. So whilst we don't necessarily know there's an exact cause, it doesn't mean it's any less serious than any other illness, any less deserving of recognition and treatment, or any easier to recover from. So it's complex because of the wide rangeness across it. So just taking that to the next level then. So thinking about that range, the continuum, just on the slide here, there's some kind of examples of different kind of symptoms that you might see, some signs that you might see from individuals. Okay, just take a moment just to think about your own mental health and where you might be today. And I think, one thing I advocate, particularly working for mental health charity, is to really just check in regularly in terms of where you are. For me today, I think I'm in the thriving section. So, I'm feeling positive, I'm feeling calm, I think, even with this presentation. But, generally I'm functioning really well. Okay. But I can think back to a couple of years ago. For me personally, I had a time in my life that things weren't so good, and actually my mental health was not in such a great place. And I can definitely kind of, when I look at this continuum, as I look at it now, I was kind of in a more of a surviving kind of arena. And that this for me was a difficult time. I was a carer. So my mum, she was living with dementia, but her health was in decline. She lived alone, I didn't live locally. And part of that was one of the driving forces that really kind of started to affect me and my mental health. And at work, that was difficult in terms of being able to concentrate and perform. My mum would ring regularly. It was hard, and that, at the drop of the hat, I might have to go and support her because something might have gone from being able to cope with living to dementia to not being able to cope. And my employer was great. My employer was really understanding, and at that time they changed some of their policies around what they could do to help. And they introduced something called a carer's passport, which allowed people to access some time to be able to kind of, just when you have those situations at the drop of the hat where you need to act. but also that understanding of being able to, to know that my mum might ring at any point during the day, and that was okay. That was okay. So having those kind of open conversations about where I was at and recognizing actually where I was at as an individual was really important for me. So these, that's just a personal story. Everybody will have, but perhaps be able to think of things themselves. But I think it's really, really important to have those conversations. These 5 zones, they kind of, we have excelling on the right hand side, where people might be are operating what we call our peak, when they're really in flow. Their lives might be full of great enjoyment, they may be completely fulfilled. Moving through to thriving, which would be kind of a normal, healthy state of mind, where they're calm and content and functioning normally. Surviving, where perhaps people are more unsettled, an unsettled state of mind. Could indicate problems, where problems could get worse and require some support, some action. So I recognised I was kind of there. But it can get into struggling, where things really start to take over, where people can become really anxious or depressed. And when no action is taken, then people can sadly end up in a crisis situation, where people are in great suffering and need immediate kind of support. So the message I'll kind of send here is that, recognise your own self-checking, but also with your staff or people that you support in your teams. Understanding what people's baseline is, understanding what is normal for them, what isn't normal, having those conversations about actually what would help. Don't make assumptions, because not everybody demonstrates signs, but it is about just having those conversations. The power of those conversations is really, really important, and just normalising those conversations really can make a massive difference to people perhaps sharing what's actually going on for them. And also people living with mental health illness, they can also be in all of these kind of sections. So with the right kind of support, people who have enduring kind of mental health illness can thrive and excel, in the workplace. So again, it's about just recognizing what, as employers, we can do to kind of support that. Okay, so kind of moving on to the next slide, one thing I just want to kind of share with you is, and some of you may have come across this in your line of work, but it's something called the stress bucket. Often I find this can be a really useful kind of conversation starter, but I think it's a useful thing just to reinforce the message how we're all unique in this. The brain is a very unique, personal thing, and all of our circumstances in life create unique human beings with unique circumstances. And the stress bucket is quite a useful tool that that can be used to really kind of get a sense of where people are at from your own point of view or in terms of others. So this stress bucket, everybody has what I call a stress bucket. Some people it can be really small, some people it can be large in terms of their capacity, but we are what we are, and science kind of suggests that there's not something really you can change about that. We all have these rain clouds kind of going into the stress bucket, which is the rain that kind of fills up the level. And that is things within our life. Some of those examples you just talked about in the chat, might go into that. And at times these rain clouds can be really big. It could be a job problem, it could be a relationship, it could be a homelessness situation, it could be domestic violence, it could be trauma, it could be all sorts of different things. We all have kind of a normal kind of resting level, but when these rain clouds get too much, too big, they can increase that amount of water in our own kind of buckets to the point where they can fill over. We also all have kind of like a relaxed state as well, and actually trying to find ways to kind of help get to that where that level is at a more reduced level can be a really beneficial thing to have. And so we have what we call these coping strategies at the bottom, and again, different coping strategies work for different people, but kind of just being able to kind of have conversations around all of this, I find is a really kind of useful starting point, particularly when I'm doing one-to-one support and coaching work, to really understand what's going on for people and getting it out and sharing what's actually going on for them. But also being able to kind of visually kind of recognize that, and also visually recognize, okay, well, what's kind of going on in terms of the coping strategies as well? Because often when it gets heavy at the top, those supporting strategies, those holes that can release that pressure and let the water out at the bottom, get smaller and narrower and can close up. And sometimes I think just kind of talking that through can really kind of help people just see the bigger picture of actually what's going on. So the stress bucket, and it's something that we do talk about on some of our training and a little bit more in depth, but it can be a really kind of useful tool for people to kind of share what's going on for them. And it can link to other things as well. So again, and this is one of the talks that we're going to do further down the line for one of our learning lunches, but is around wellness action plans. So people recognizing kind of, you know, what things might be difficult for them, and understanding their coping strategies and working out what support work could give them can be a really great kind of starting point for talking and having those really healthy kind of conversations. Okay, so I'll just move on to the next slide. We've just got a few more just in terms of input, and then we'll have a final kind of bringing it together and chatting. But this, again, might just be a little bit of food for thought for people in terms of their workplaces and thinking about where they might personally sit on this kind of scale. So this is I guess, a message about, as organisations, how important it is to design work with well-being in mind. This is a graph around where we've got performance on the x-axis and level of pressure on the y, so ranging from low to high on each kind of continuum. And you can see we've got like this kind of bell-shaped kind of graph that's taking place. And just have a think about yourself, about where you might be on this. You know, just working through the different kind of quadrants. You've got perhaps at the lower end where you've got perhaps low pressure and low performance. It can be an area of what we call boredom. Human beings need a sense of purpose. You know, I'm a big believer in terms of well-being, that purpose really drives people, and actually being in this sector for a long time isn't good either. As we kind of progress up the graph, we've got what we call our comfort zones, where there's a moderate level of pressure on our work situations, which, you know, it brings up that performance within people, and we can function comfortably in there. But where we get the best out of people in the workplace is this kind of this blue zone, where we call the stretch zone. Yeah, so this is when we're kind of coming out of our comfort zones and really kind of moving into stretch. And stretch is good for us as human beings, because it gives us that ability to grow. It gives us that ability to grow and develop, which again, from our well-being point of view, is really important. But being at the stretch and the top end of stretch for too long can often push us into this strain kind of phase. And in this strain kind of phase, basically we're stretched all of the time. And actually the optimum place to be really is to kind of oscillate around that, kind of going in the comfort zone and into the stretch zone. So recognizing that we get a fantastic growth as human beings in the stretch zone, but also we need that comfort zone as well to recover, whether that be through breaks, workplace design, whether that be through looking at our targets at work. There's all sorts of different things we can look at. It's about how regularly we're having our holidays, but to allow ourselves to keep ourselves well in that zone, because just that continued stretch and strain can take people into where the pressure gets too much, and it can lead to stress. It can take us into where people can hit crisis, where they're running on empty. Yeah, and there's an area above that where what I kind of call the area of delusion, where people just think that working harder and harder and harder will resolve everything, but actually that's the worst thing to do in terms of that pressure. Just it keeps increasing and pushes us to that point of crisis. You know, burnout has been globally in the COVID pandemic situation something that has increased. There's statistics on it that are starting to come to the fore, but there's been particular areas within different sectors that perhaps have really kind of been pushed along with the pressure even more. So our key workers, for example, carers, for example, the BAME community as well. There's been evidence to suggest that, you know, that pressure has kind of taken them to unsustainable levels of strain, and burnout is happening. So Designing work with well-being in mind is a really important message for us all to think about. I think it's a really important check-in just to think about, okay, where am I on this? You know, where are my team on that? Where are our staff on that? You know, how can we best manage that situation to make sure that we're getting great performance out of people, but we're not pushing them to the point where things can lead to stress and people can't cope. Okay, so have a think, where are you and where are your colleagues on that? A couple more slides just to leave you with. Again, stigma is going to be a topic that we do come back to in another learning lunch, but it's important to think about the stigma that surrounds mental health. Emma Mamo, who's head of our workplace wellbeing at Mind, National Mind, you know, a quote from her, and I'll read it to you. Open and supportive workplaces benefit everybody, employees, employers, and the bottom line. You know, it's about creating a culture where staff feel able to talk about mental health. And it is now more important than ever that staff are listened to and know that they are valued. So as leaders, as people in key roles within an organisation, it's really important that we're role modelling, sharing our own stories, and allowing people that opportunity to talk. Okay, so some guiding principles. Well-being needs to be the priority. Need to understand people's individual circumstances. Yeah, going back to that, everybody is unique. You know, having those conversations about their own circumstances is really, really important. In this time that we're in at the moment, clarity has never been more important around what are the priorities as workloads have increased. But also, you know, time to review policies and processes and focus on simplification so it really supports our employees. That community piece is also really important. Regular updates, two-way dialogue, social connection. So the wellness kind of action plans can be a real great way to start those conversations. And I think it's also important as organisations at the moment to be really reflective about where we are, really take stock, to test and learn and to seek feedback about, is there a better way of doing things? That changing landscape piece, particularly around mental health, you know, it is a constantly moving feast. So we have to therefore keep learning, keep seeking feedback, and keep adapting as a reaction to that. So just some key takeaways for you, just some food for thought. So the pandemic, it's ironically given us an opportunity to tackle some of the stigma, improve awareness, and design work with well-being in mind. You know, another key takeaway is to really start to support your people and starting those conversations. It's never too early, you know, recognizing those signs, recognizing if people are you know, that their baseline has changed, something is different, start those conversations, you know, find ways to do that. And be available of the resources that are here. So, you know, Thriving at Work project, there's funding here to kind of kickstart positive change. So, you know, it's a really, you know, having these resources available is a really great opportunity now for organisations, small and medium enterprises, to really kind of look at, okay, well, what could we do? What could we do differently and how can we improve? Okay, so final thought from me then before we just kind of open it up and see if anybody's got any questions. But the strain of COVID-19 has brought the issue of mental health to the forefront like never before, you know, but it can be a catalyst. And I urge you and your organisations to kind of think about, okay, well, what can we do now that really kind of make sure that mental health is and the awareness and understanding and how we support people around mental health is absolutely at the forefront of how we operate. It's a recognition that achieving good mental health is constantly a work in progress for all of us as individuals. There's not a fixed end point, but with the right resources and working environment, we can move towards creating an inclusive and collaborative workplace. The Thriving at Work project is there to support us around that. And now is the time to step up those efforts and be responsible, caring and empathetic employers of the 21st century. Okay, so next steps. Emma, I don't know whether you just want to kind of just quickly jump in here before we just open the floor to questions in terms of what how people could access more information around thriving at work, should they, be interested in kind of developing that training or workplace support a little further?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So the Thriving at Work project essentially is available to anybody that's in employment, particularly the workplace support and the diversity training. That can be any employed individual from any sized organisation doing any type of job. It's there for you, it's there for your employees, it's there for your colleagues. And I sort of encourage anybody who thinks they might benefit from any of this type of support or any of the training that we have available to get in touch, to ask questions, to sort of book onto any training they think they would benefit from. For organisations as a whole, you have to be an SME, so a micro, small or medium-sized enterprise. The project itself runs across North Yorkshire and East Riding, and I think it's something like 97% of all organisations across that geography are SMEs, so that there's a really high chance that you would be eligible for some support. If you're not eligible for the inclusive workplace support, your employees, your colleagues would still be eligible for the other aspects of the project too. It is a European funded project, so with that does come some paperwork, some eligibility criteria, but it's all stuff we can talk you through, and it is as simplified as it possibly can be at this point.
Okay, thanks, Emma. And yeah, so I guess the key kind of landing page to find out more information is just on here. So the Better Connect website, if you look under their projects and Thriving at Work, then that is the great landing page where you can then kind of access further information and sign up to different training, etc., etc.